There are people who hold things together so quietly that the thing itself becomes invisible. Not the holding, the thing. It exists, it runs, it arrives every summer like good weather, and nobody thinks to ask where it comes from or who's been carrying it since before anyone thought to be grateful. I have been that person in my family for most of my adult life. My name is Audrey Voss. I am 36 years old. I am a municipal planner living in Akron, Ohio, and for 8 consecutive summers the first drove 4.5 hours north to a rental property on the eastern shore of Lake Erie to build a week that my family looked forward to all year and could not have produced on their own. This is what I built. And this is the night I set it down. My father, Warren Voss, is 64 years old. He grew up in a small industrial town outside of Youngstown where his own father worked a factory floor for 31 years and came home quiet every evening and said very little to anyone. My father decided early that he would be the opposite of that. He would be the man who talked, the man who remembered, the man who made every person in a room feel like the most important person in it. He became that man completely. He has run a residential contracting business in Akron for 32 years, and every client he has ever had could tell you his middle name. He coaches a recreational softball league on Thursday evenings and knows every player's batting history, their kids' school names, the year their mother moved into assisted living. He sends handwritten notes. He calls on birthdays without being reminded. He has a quality I have spent my whole life trying to name accurately, and the most accurate thing I can say is this. My father is genuinely warm to everyone he chooses to see. The word is chooses. He has 2 sons and 1 daughter. My brothers are Thomas, who is 40, and Greg, who is 37. I am the youngest and the only daughter, and from a fairly early age, I understood something about the architecture of my father's attention that I spent 20 years trying to disprove. His attention followed volume. Thomas was loud and physical and played 3 sports and filled every room the way my father filled rooms. Greg was the funny one, the one who got into small trouble that my father found privately delightful, the one my father looked at and saw a version of himself at that age. I was the one who read at the dinner table until my mother told me to put the book away. I was the one who stayed still. A child who does not push does not register as a child who wants something. I want to be careful here because I have spent considerable time, including 2 years of Thursday evening sessions with a therapist named Dr. Pauline Marsh in Akron, making sure I am telling this accurately and not dramatically. My father is not a cruel man. He is not a man who would ever look at his daughter and decide she does not matter. He is a man who learned to love in a specific register, and I was not speaking that register, and neither of us knew it for a very long time. What I knew from about the age of 12 was that the way to exist in my family was to be useful in concrete and practical ways. If I could not be loud, I could be competent. If I could not fill a room, I could organize one. This is not a conscious decision a 12-year-old makes. It is a lesson a 12-year-old absorbs from the specific temperature of a house and carries forward without examining it. I started building the Lake Erie summers when I was 28. It was not my idea, in the way that ideas usually are. My mother mentioned at Easter that year that it would be nice to do something together as a family that summer, something more than the usual backyard gatherings, and then she said nothing else about it, and April passed, and May passed, and I called the property management company in June. The rental was a 4-bedroom house on 2 acres backing onto the water outside a small town called Geneva on the Lake. The property manager was a methodical, unhurried man named Stuart Briggs who had been managing lakeside rentals in that county for 19 years and who, by the 3rd summer, recognized my voice before I gave my name. I called every February to hold the last week of July. I confirmed in April. I called again in June with the final head count. The first summer, there were 7 of us. By the 4th summer, there were 14, counting Greg's wife and her parents who had begun joining us, and Thomas's 2 kids who were old enough to manage the boat launch without supervision. What I managed across 8 summers was this. I built the grocery list every year from a master document I kept updated in a shared folder that no one else ever opened. I confirmed the dock permits with the county each May, a process that required 2 phone calls and 1 form submitted by a specific deadline that I had written into my calendar in February. I arranged sleeping assignments based on who was coming that year and cross-referenced them against the previous year's complaints, Thomas's older son could not share a room with Greg's daughter after the incident in year 3. My mother needed the ground floor room after her hip surgery in year 5. I coordinated the boat rental from a company in Ashtabula that required a deposit in April and confirmation of operator licenses 2 weeks before arrival. The summer Greg's wife developed a severe shellfish allergy, and nobody thought to tell me until 48 hours before we arrived. I drove to 3 different grocery stores in a town I did not live in at 9:15 on a Wednesday night and replaced every item on the list that contained shellfish or shared a production facility with shellfish. I left the new bags in the pantry without mentioning it to anyone. Not to Greg. Not to his wife. Not to my father. I did not want anyone to feel guilty about the disruption. I did not want the week to begin on an apologetic note. I want to tell you something about that Wednesday night because I think it matters. I had driven up a full day early to prepare the house. I had been at the property since 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had made 3 trips to the store already that day for the regular grocery list. When Greg's wife texted me at 7:43 p.m. to mention, in passing, as a footnote to a longer message about what time they planned to arrive, that she had been diagnosed with the allergy in March, I was sitting on the porch steps eating a sandwich I had made from the bread and cheese I had bought on the second store run. I did not feel angry. I want to be precise about that because I have thought about it many times since. What I felt was something closer to recognition. Of course, she had not thought to tell me sooner. Of course the information had arrived at 7:43 p.m. the night before. Of course, I was the one sitting on the porch steps in a town I did not live in figuring out how to solve it. This was the weather of my life in this family. I had simply stopped noticing how consistently it rained in my direction. I went to 3 stores. I found everything. I left the bags in the pantry. My coworker and close friend Judith Crane, who works in the environmental compliance division of our planning department and who has known me since we shared an office during my first year at the city, heard me describe one of those summers once over lunch. She listened without interrupting, and then said something I have not stopped thinking about. She said, "Audrey, you are the load-bearing wall. Nobody thinks about the load-bearing wall until it's gone, and the ceiling starts to move." I told her that was a grim way to put it. She said, "It's accurate, though." She was right. Tell me something before I go on. Where are you right now, and what does the evening look like from where you are? Is it quiet or is there noise in it? I ask because I want you to hold on to whatever is ordinary and yours about where you are while I tell you about the last night of the 8th summer. The 8th summer was the year of my parents' 40th anniversary. The decision to market at the lake house was mine, the same way all the decisions were mine. I had driven up 2 days early that year. I bought sunflowers and white asters from a farm stand on Route 534 and arranged them in 2 glass pitchers I found in the back of the kitchen cabinet. I made a reservation at a restaurant called the Harbor View in the center of town, white tablecloths, good wine list, water visible from the corner tables, 6 weeks in advance because I had looked up the reviews and understood that July weekends went fast. I wrote a card signed from all 3 children and from Greg's wife and Thomas's wife because Thomas had texted me on a Thursday asking if I could handle the card, and I had said yes, and I had. There were 16 people at that dinner. My parents, Thomas and his wife Carolyn and their 2 kids, Greg and his wife and her parents who were visiting from Pittsburgh, 3 of my parents' longtime friends, the Holloways, 2 neighbors from the street they had lived on for 27 years, and my father's older brother, Uncle Ray, who had driven up from Columbus specifically for the occasion. And me. In the blue linen dress I had bought in May from a small shop in Akron after reading that the restaurant had a dress code, a dress I had driven across town to find because I had looked up the restaurant and thought it warranted the effort. Across from me, 2 seats to my left, sat my father's sister, Aunt Miriam, who is 61 years old and has lived alone in a farmhouse outside of Warren, Ohio since her divorce 12 years ago. She is the only person in my extended family who, when she asks how I am, waits for the actual answer. She had brought a bottle of Burgundy. She said she had been saving for something that earned it. She opened it herself and poured it herself, and when she handed me my glass, her eyes held mine for a moment in the way that meant she was paying attention. My father stood up at 8:22 in the evening. He does this at dinners. It is his signature, the move his clients love, the move that has ended 1,000 evenings on a warm and memorable note. He taps his glass, the table settles, and he talks. He is genuinely gifted at it. He has the ease of a man who has never once worried about whether a room liked him, because rooms have always liked him. That night he talked about 40 years. He talked about my mother's steadiness and what it had built quietly over 4 decades. He talked about the lake house tradition and how it had become the thing he looked forward to most all year, the week that reminded him what mattered. He used the word family 4 times. He was better than good. Some of the people at that table had known him for 30 years, and they were smiling the way people smile when someone says the exact right thing at the exact right moment. Then he said he wanted to thank the people who had made this particular evening possible. He thanked the Holloways, Dawn and Patricia, who had been their friends since before I was born and who he said had shown up for their family in more ways than he could count. He looked at Dawn when he said it, and Dawn nodded once. He thanked Uncle Ray for the 4-hour drive. He thanked Greg's in-laws for making the trip from Pittsburgh and said they had become real family, not just in-laws, and he meant it. You could hear that he meant it. He thanked Thomas and Carolyn and said watching Thomas become a father had been one of the great privileges of his life. He thanked the 2 neighbors, Bill and Sandra Kohler, who had been there for every difficult year on that street, and who he said were proof that good neighbors were a kind of grace. Then he paused. It was a short pause. A half-second. The kind that in another context would mean nothing, the natural breath between one thought and the next. But I have been reading my father's pauses my entire life, and I know the difference between a pause that is gathering and a pause that has simply arrived at the end of what it came to say. He raised his glass to my mother. The room raised their glasses. People drank. I was sitting 6 feet from where he was standing. I had driven up 2 days early. I had arranged the flowers in the kitchen that morning before anyone arrived. I had made the reservations 6 weeks ago. I had confirmed the dock permits in May. I had replaced the entire pantry at 9:15 on a Wednesday night for a shellfish allergy nobody thought to mention until the night before. I had updated the master document every February for 8 years. My name was not on the printed menu I had designed and sent to the restaurant 3 weeks before the dinner because it had not occurred to me to put it there. Something in me went very still. Not cold. Not hard. Still. The way a room goes still when the last sound is finished, and what remains is not silence exactly, but the absence of effort. Across the table, Aunt Miriam looked at me. Not with pity. Not with the theatrical expression of someone performing sympathy for an audience. She looked at me the way a person looks when they have seen something clearly and want the other person to know that a witness exists. I looked back at her for a moment. Then I looked at my hands. I sat through the next 40 seconds while the room settled back into itself. Until my father sat back down. Until Greg said something to his wife that made her laugh. Until the sound in the room returned to the ordinary pleasant hum of a dinner in full motion. Then I picked up my small bag from the back of my chair. I stood up. I walked to the coat rack near the restaurant entrance and I took my jacket and I stepped outside. The air smelled like lake water and cut grass and the particular coolness that comes off the water after 8 o'clock in July. The parking lot was lit by small ground-level fixtures that threw soft light across the gravel. I had not specified those lights. Someone else had thought of those. I noticed that and filed it away without knowing why. It was 8:41 p.m. I walked to my car. I got in. I closed the door. And then I sat. Checkpoint A. 900 words. Target, 4,500 to 5,500. Short, continuing. I was not crying. I was not shaking. I was sitting in a car in a gravel parking lot outside a restaurant on the shore of Lake Erie on the last night of the 8th summer, and I was doing something I had not allowed myself to do in a very long time. I was being completely honest with myself. Not the version where I said it was fine. He was emotional. He had a lot to cover. Not the version where I reminded myself I had not expected recognition, and therefore its absence should not register. The honest version. My father had stood up at his 40th anniversary dinner at a restaurant I had reserved and a table I had organized and raised a glass to the neighbors and the family friends and the in-laws from Pittsburgh. He had thanked the man who drove 4 hours and the couple who had been good neighbors on a street. He had not said my name, not because he did not know it. He had said it 3 hours earlier when I arrived at the lake house, and he had put his arm around me briefly and said I looked well. He knew my name. He simply did not think of it in the moment when a man takes stock of what he is grateful for, and the words come out in the order they actually exist inside him. My name was not in the first tier of what he was grateful for. I had been building things for this family for 8 years, and I had never once been in the first tier. I sat with that for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I looked at the clock when I got in the car, and I looked at it again when I started the engine. 8:41 to 8:52. Something in me settled in the way I can only describe as the feeling of a question being answered that you had been asking for a very long time without admitting you were asking it. Not the answer you wanted. The true one. I called Judith when I got onto the highway. She picked up on the second ring. I left the dinner, I said. A pause. One beat. Are you okay? Yes, I said. Actually okay. What happened? I told her briefly. The toast. The neighbors. The in-laws from Pittsburgh. The pause. The way he raised his glass and moved on. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, Audrey, how long have you been doing this? It was not a question. She said it the way you say something when you already know the answer, and you want the other person to hear it out loud. 8 years, I said. The summers. And before that, I thought about it. The Easter dinners I had organized since I was 24. The birthday cards I had sent to every family member every year, without fail. The Christmas visit I had driven 6 hours round trip to make happen even the year I had bronchitis, and my project deadline was the following Monday. Longer than 8 years. Yeah, Judith said. I thought so. We drove for a while without talking. Judith allows silence in a way that most people don't. The road was dark and flat, and the lake was behind me, and the highway stretched forward into a dark I found genuinely comforting. Are you going back? She said eventually. No, I said. Okay, she said. Drive safe. Text me when you're close. I got home at 3:07 in the morning. I hung my blue linen dress on the back of the closet door. I put the kettle on. I sat at my own kitchen table in my own apartment in Akron with a mug of tea between both hands, and I thought about everything. I thought about Stuart Briggs and his careful phone manner every February. I thought about the doc permits and the master document and the 3 stores at 9:15 on a Wednesday night. I thought about the sunflowers and white asters and the glass pitchers I had left on the kitchen table at the lake house. I thought about my father at the entrance when I arrived, arm around me briefly. You look well, already turning toward the next person. I thought about what Judith had said. Longer than 8 years. I was not angry. I want to say that clearly because I know how this kind of story gets told, and the way it gets told implies a woman burning with something. I was not burning. I was tired in the way I had not let myself be tired for a long time. Not the polite tiredness I described to people when they asked how I was. The real kind. The kind that lives in the places in your body where you've been holding something steady for so long that you have stopped noticing the effort of holding it. The kind that does not go away with sleep because it is not made of fatigue. It is made of years. I drank the tea. I went to bed at 4:14. I lay in my own apartment in the dark, and I let the evening be exactly what it was without trying to soften it or reframe it or find the version where my father's oversight was innocent enough to dismiss. It was innocent. That was not the point. The point was what the innocence revealed about the order of things inside him. Innocent oversights land on the people who are already invisible. You do not accidentally omit the people you are in the habit of seeing. My father's first text arrived 2 days later. A Sunday morning at 9:53. Audrey, we noticed you left early Saturday. Hope everything is okay. Your mother was a little worried. Let us know you're good. I read it 3 times. He had typed my name correctly. All 3 syllables in the right order with a capital A. I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and made toast and ate it standing at the window, looking at the street below. And I thought, he knows my name. He has always known my name. He knew it when he was standing 6 feet from me at a dinner I had built. He simply did not think to say it in the moment when the words came out in the order they actually exist inside him. There is a difference between forgetting and not thinking of. I had spent 2 years in Thursday sessions with Dr. Marsh learning to hold that distinction without flinching. Forgetting implies it was there and slipped. Not thinking of implies it was never in the category that gets said. I had been building things for 8 years, and I had never been in the category that gets said. I did not reply that day. I did not reply the next day or the day after. On the 5th day, a Thursday evening, my phone rang, and it was Aunt Miriam. She is not a woman who calls without a reason. There was no preamble. She said she had been thinking about Saturday since she drove home, and she wanted to say something to me directly. She said she had seen exactly what happened. She said it plainly, without framing it as an accident or a misunderstanding or anything other than what it was. Then she said something I had not been expecting. She said, "I want to tell you something about your father that I want you to hear as information, not as an excuse." She told me about their father, my grandfather Warren Sr., who I had met 3 times before he died, and who I remembered as a large, loud man who told long stories and shook your hand too hard. She said Warren Sr. had loved exclusively in the register of performance and reciprocity. If you showed up loudly, he noticed. If you showed up quietly, you did not exist to him. She said my father had grown up in that house and had absorbed it entirely without knowing he had. She said it traveled through families like a habit nobody chose to form and nobody noticed they were passing along. "I know," I said. "I've understood it in pieces for a long time. I just kept thinking that if I kept building things, eventually something would shift." "It might shift," she said, "but not because you keep booking the lake house." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The kettle was on the stove. Outside the window, the Thursday evening was ordinary and completely mine. I thought about what she had said. Not because you keep booking the lake house. I had been trying to earn visibility through the exact mechanism that guaranteed I would remain invisible, building things quietly for a man who had been taught that quiet things do not need to be seen. I had been speaking a language he could not hear for 36 years. I had never once stopped to ask whether the problem was the message or the medium. I replied to my father's text 11 days after he sent it. I kept it short. I said I was safe, I needed some time, I would reach out when I was ready to have a real conversation. I did not explain. I did not add the softening qualifiers I would have added a year ago. I sent it, put the phone in my coat pocket, and walked to the coffee shop on the corner, and sat in the window booth and read for an hour. He called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 4 minutes long. He said he had not realized I had left until well into the evening. He said he was sure he had mentioned me in the toast. He was certain of it. He said the evening had been emotional and there was so much to cover, and if he had left anything out, it was not intentional. He did not say he was sorry he had not said my name. He said he was sorry if I had felt left out. The difference between those 2 sentences is the difference between a man who understands what happened and a man who understands that something has gone wrong and is trying to locate the version where he is not responsible for it. I listened to the message once. Then I put the phone in my bag and went for a walk along the towpath behind my building and watched the water move and thought about nothing specific for 45 minutes. Checkpoint B. 4. 800 words. Act 7 needs 4. 200 more words. We spoke 4 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon at 2:14, when I had finished the week's site review reports and felt for the first time like I had something to say rather than something to manage. He answered on the second ring. We talked for 38 minutes. He was, for much of it, the version of himself I find most difficult, warm and expansive and genuinely confused about what the problem was, because from inside his version of events there had been no deliberate act, and intent was the thing he measured everything by. He told me the evening had been a lot to hold. He told me he had been nervous about the toast, which surprised me because I had never seen my father nervous about speaking in front of a room in my life. He said my mother had been upset about my leaving and he had not wanted to add to her distress by raising it before she had settled. I let him finish. Then I said, as evenly as I could, "Dad." I drove up 2 days early. I made the reservation in May. I confirmed the dock permits. I replaced the entire grocery list the night before because of Greg's wife's allergy, and I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want the week to start on an apologetic note. I organized the card. I arranged the sleeping assignments. I have been doing this for 8 years. At the dinner, you thanked the neighbors and Uncle Ray and the Holloways and Greg's in-laws. You did not say my name. He was quiet. "I'm not saying you did it on purpose," I said. I'm saying it happened. And it happened because the way your attention moves in this family does not naturally come to rest on me. And I've been building things and staying quiet and making myself useful for long enough that I have finally stopped being able to pretend I don't notice. A long pause. Audrey, he said. I didn't see it that way. I know, I said. That's what I've been sitting with. He did not have an answer for that. I did not need him to. I was not calling to receive the neat version, the one where he says exactly the right thing, and I feel seen, and we agree to go forward differently. That version does not exist in real families. It exists in the version of events that people prefer to tell. What I was doing was something simpler and harder at the same time. I was saying the true thing plainly, without softening the edges of it, because I had spent enough years making things smooth for everyone else's comfort, and I was finished. We ended the call without resolution. I had expected that. My father is not a man who turns a corner in a single phone call. He needs time with things he always has. He may come back to this one, and he may find a way to hold it that changes something structural between us. He may come back to it and find that the version he can hold is not the version that actually happened. I have stopped investing in the prediction. What I can tell you is what happened with the lake house. In February, when I would normally have called Stuart Briggs to hold the last week of July, I did not call. I left February alone. I left March alone. In April, my mother called and asked if I had reached out to the rental company yet. I said I hadn't. She said she had assumed I would handle it the way I always did. I said gently that I thought it would be good for someone else to take the lead this year, and that I was happy to come if someone organized the dates. There was a pause on the line. She said she wasn't sure she knew how to start. I said I could send her Stuart's number, and she said yes, please. I sent her Stuart Briggs's number. I included his preference for early February calls and the county permit deadline in May. 3 weeks later, Thomas texted me. He said the July dates were already gone. Stuart had held them through March as a courtesy to returning guests, but had released them when no one called. He said there was another property 2 miles up the road, but it was smaller and the dock situation was complicated. I wrote back, "That's really too bad. If you call Stuart in January next year, he'll usually hold something. He's very easy to work with." Thomas did not reply. I sat with my phone for a moment after sending it and waited to feel guilty. The guilt did not come. What came instead was something quieter, a recognition that I had spent years managing the disruption caused by my own absence, absorbing it as though it were my fault that a structure collapsed when the only person who had ever been maintaining it stopped. I put the phone face down on my desk and went back to the drainage report I had been working on. The summer went on without the lake house. I finished a trail corridor project I had been developing for the city for 14 months, a 2-mile walking path through a restored wetland on the south side of Akron that had required more coordination with the Army Corps of Engineers than any project I had worked on before. On the morning after the final installation, I drove out at 6:45 to walk the path before anyone else arrived. The cattails along the north edge had gone in exactly right. At the entry point where the path curved away from the parking area and the wetland opened up on both sides, a man was standing with his dog, not walking, just standing, looking at the water. His dog was sitting next to him. Neither of them was moving. I sat in my car with the engine off and watched for about 3 minutes. The man eventually moved on down the path, without looking back at the entry point. The path was just there, finished, standing, holding its shape without anyone watching it. I thought about that on the drive to work. About the things you build that do not require you to remain standing next to them. About the difference between work that needs you and work that holds. Judith and I had dinner twice that summer. Both times at her apartment, both times on the kitchen floor with takeout containers between us, because we have been eating on kitchen floors since we were 27 and have never felt the same way about dining tables. The second time, in late August, I told her about Thomas's text and the lake house falling through. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How does it feel, imagining them trying to do it without you?" I thought about it honestly. Somewhere between sad and relieved. I said, "More relieved." "That's progress," she said. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I'm just tired." "Both are true at the same time," Judith said. "They don't cancel each other out." She pulled a carton of pad Thai toward her. Outside her window, the August evening was orange and slow, and the street below was quiet. I thought about what it would feel like to go back. To call Stuart in February. To build the list. To drive 4.5 hours north in order to once again be the load-bearing wall of a week that did not look up to notice its own foundation. I could not find the feeling that would make me want to do that. I called my father in late October on a Sunday at 11:06 in the morning after I had finished my coffee and reviewed the permit applications for a small plaza redesign I was starting work on, and felt, for the first time in months, like I had something to say rather than something to survive. He answered on the second ring. We talked for 38 minutes. It was uncomfortable in the ways I had expected, and in some ways I had not. He told me he had been thinking about our earlier conversation. He said he had talked to my mother about it, and she had helped him understand some things he had not been seeing clearly. He said he knew he had not always made me feel as visible as he should have, and he was sorry for that. He said it simply and without qualification, and I believed him. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say I believed him. I believe my father was sorry. I believe he felt genuine remorse in that moment. I also know that remorse felt in October and change enacted in February are two different things, and I have stopped conflating them. Feeling sorry for a pattern and interrupting a pattern require different muscles, and my father has been using the same ones his whole life. I do not know whether the October call changed something structural. I know it changed what he said out loud. Those are not the same thing, and I have spent enough time with Dr. Marsh to hold that distinction without resentment. What I said was, I know you're sorry, Dad. I believe that. What I need you to understand is that this isn't about the toast. The toast was just the moment I finally stopped explaining it to myself as something other than what it was. This is about 36 years of building things quietly and waiting for you to look up. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I hear you. I do not know what he did with it after we hung up. I know what I did. I drove to the wetland trail on the south side of Akron on the following Saturday morning and walked the full 2 miles for the first time since the installation. The cattails were turning brown at the edges. The water was flat and gray in the October light. At the far end of the path where it curved back toward the parking area, there was a bench I had specified, a low, simple thing made from reclaimed timber, positioned to face west so that in the evenings it would catch the light off the water. A woman was sitting on it. She was older, maybe 70, and she was reading. She did not look up when I passed. The path held her weight, without asking anything of her. I thought about what it means to build something that holds without you. The lake house dates were taken by a family from Cleveland that July. Stuart Briggs sent me a courtesy note in March letting me know the property had been rebooked and thanking me for 8 years of prompt and reliable coordination. He said returning guests like me were what made his work manageable. I read the note twice, sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, and felt something I had not expected. Not grief, not relief exactly, but the particular quiet of a door that has been closed with full intention. Some things are not taken. They are lent, quietly, without a contract, until the person doing the lending decides to stop. I still talk to my father. I drove to Akron for Christmas and sat at the table and passed the dishes and participated in the family the way I always have. He made a toast at Christmas dinner. He mentioned my mother and Thomas and Greg. He looked at me and said my name and said he was glad I was there. I do not know whether he would have said it if we hadn't had the October call. I do not know whether one conversation changed the order of things inside him or whether it only changed what he was careful to say out loud. I am still working out what I can live with on either side of that question. What I know is this. The morning after Christmas, I drove back to Akron on Route 76 with the windows cracked and the radio off, and somewhere past the county line, I felt the particular quiet of a person who has put something down that they have been carrying for a very long time and has not yet picked it back up. Not because they have decided never to pick it up again. Because they are, for the first time in a long time, standing upright without it, and they want to stay in that feeling for a moment before they decide anything. Visibility is not something you can build yourself into. You can build forever, and the person who is not looking will not see you. What I was trying to do with 8 summers of lake house logistics was solve an attention problem with a competence solution, and those two things do not speak to each other. I know that now. I knew it sitting in the parking lot at 8:41 on the last night of the 8th summer. I had been knowing it for a long time before that evening simply made it impossible to unknow. Forgiveness is not access. Understanding is not reunion. Compassion is not a key to my front door. I did not go back to Cedar Lake that summer. I went to work and I designed things and I had dinner on the floor with Judith and I drove past the wetland trail on a Saturday morning and watched the cattails hold their shape in the October wind without anyone standing next to them explaining their value. That was enough. That was more than enough. If you have ever sat at a table and waited for someone to say your name, really say it, the way that means they know you are actually in the room. I want to ask you something gently. How long have you been waiting? And what would it mean to stop needing them to say it, because you already know it yourself?